What's up, everyone? Welcome back. And today I am joined by special guest Yvon Chócron, and we are going to be talking about a bunch of different topics. But I was drawn initially to Yvon because of his video that he put out, and he does a lot of videos bridging the gap between science and spirituality, which I try to do as well on the channel here. And he had a video that particularly was really cool, talking about demons, but from a scientific perspective, how this can be kind of reconciled, because oftentimes when you hear that word, you kind of feel a little bit of a disconnect, like, oh, people are talking about demons, this I can't really relate. But he brought it together, and in a way where it was really under it was really fascinating and drew upon my own experience, and it was something that I related to a lot. So thank you so much, Yvon, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So we were just talking before. You're also a plant medicine facilitator, and I know that that has played a large role into the coaching that you now do, as well as really your ideas that you share on the channel as well. And so I know when we were speaking, like I personally, I have done peyote. I was part of a peyote ceremony. That's my closest thing to doing an ayahuasca ceremony. But I've also, I've done mushrooms, I've done LSD, and I know that, like we mentioned, a lot of people for a long time have been kind of very wary of these things. But I think that when it's done in a particular way with a particular intention, it can actually be very beneficial for people in terms of kind of opening them up to a lot of the energy that we can't perceive. I mean, it's science, as you know, probably, and people on this channel, we're only able to see and perceive such a small spectrum of what actually exists. Obviously other animals have better hearing than we do. They have better sight than we do, better sense of smell. And so I think that these plant medicines can actually help us get to more of the truth of real objective reality. And I would love to basically hear how that kind of how what your thoughts are on it. I know that you're sharing on the channel a lot of insights that you have. Is it something that you think? I know you probably wouldn't want to recommend it to people necessarily because it's something that's very particular to their own journey, but how would you say it has really shaped and informed your coaching with people and kind of what you do on your channel?
Uh, it's not that I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I wouldn't force it on people. Or if a lot of the things that we love today, besides psychedelics, like completely apart from that, are because somebody said, hey, gone through I've gone through this experience, or I've gone to this restaurant. This is awesome. I think I love you, and I would love for you to experience that. So that I think is totally within the realm of moral possibilities. Now, if somebody says like, "Oh no," and then you start insisting, then that's something that I would probably not do. That I have done, obviously, in the past when I started learning about all of this. And the thing about one of the reasons why I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it is because, as you were saying, these plants can help us get to places that either you can't get in any other way, or the way to get there would require years and years and years of very diligent meditation practices, which, by the way, I am all for. I'm not against it, or I'm not saying meditation should be replaced by plant medicine. However, I think we both agree that we're living in a world that is not optimal, to say the least, when it comes to how people treat each other, when it comes to the hunger, when it comes to all of the ways in which this world could be more beautiful, that we know that is possible and is not there. And I feel like we have reached a point where there is a sense of urgency, where we all need to do as much healing as possible. We all need to start forgiving ourselves, forgiving those who have hurt us, teaching others to forgive themselves, and all of these things that will eventually lead us to living in a much more beautiful world, where our interactions are more genuine, where we don't need to fake anything, where our boundaries are properly established and other people respect them. And all of these things are things that people can achieve either with years of spiritual practice, and sometimes they can achieve it with a few sessions of a psychedelic plant, which then teach them to start a meditation practice. So if you want a big mass of people to start having, for example, that idea of being in meditation for a very long time, or start a spiritual practice that lasts a whole lifetime, a lot of them will not even start unless they get a spark, like maybe the gas is there, but they need the spark to make it explode just to give a weird analogy. Um, so I think another topic around this is that we depend on plants for everything. We depend on plants for air. We depend on plants for food. We depend on plants for the pollination and the variety of this planet. So what makes us believe that we also don't depend on plants for mental health? Everybody's today is so obsessed with physical health, like this diet full of plants, full of greens, full of this, which is fantastic. It's true. But if we have all of these medicines basically for our bodies, isn't it logical at the very least to say there's also these other plants that have a different role, which are medicines for our mind rather than our bodies? So when you put it into this whole perspective, I think it makes psychedelic plants not only more acceptable, but almost like, if you will, necessary, or that it has been given to us with the same intention and in the same way as all of the other plants that we consume for other things.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I answered to your second question, but I
Well,
forgot
no,
it.
that's all right, because this brings me to, this is getting my mind really going on this, because when I did my peyote ceremony, it was facilitated by somebody from a Native American tradition who, in their family, this had been passed down for generations. I mean, they said was from over 1,000 years old, this ceremony that
Mhm.
they passed down from their ancestors. And I think that there's really something to this when we think about what you're talking about, that, yeah, food is medicine, plants are medicine. And I think that the creator, whether you believe in God or you believe in source energy or infinite intelligence, whatever resonates with you, that everything was created. This planet was created. And when we go back and look at a lot of these ancient cultures, this was a part of it. They would have these ceremonies and do it in this very intentional way, where I think, like, a lot of what is happening, medicine is a very accurate word, because it's almost, I feel like, revealing more truth to people. And I also feel like when you go through these things, and some of the ancient cultures, especially Native Americans, come to mind because of the ceremony that I did with peyote, that their relationship with earth and with animals and with everything on the planet, they felt the harmony there. And that's something that has been lost in our current modern day society. And also, I think when you do these things, like you mentioned, you're going to be much more likely to embody a lot of these older spiritual teachings. So principles like do no harm, do unto others as the golden rule, treat others as you like to
Mhm.
be treated. Because the truth, I think, is that, yeah, we are all connected. And by doing harm, an act of violence against somebody else or an act of harm is essentially like you're doing it to yourself. And I think that that is one of the truths that these medicines reveal to us. So, yeah.
And what's fascinating is that it reveals it to people who never in their life considered that. And that's what makes it so fascinating. The same with meditation. You get somebody that's never meditated in their life, that's been angry all their life, that has been abused as a child. Imagine the least, the person that is the least in contact with themselves, and they've never read a book around it, uh, and then they sit with these plants, and then they come out completely brand new in this way. They start thinking like, oh, these things that maybe for you and I feel too basic, like if you hurt others, you're hurting yourself, and stuff like that. That for us maybe is, we don't even think about it as a deep as a deep thing anymore. these people might realize it for the first time, even if they've never had a practice before. So obviously, these are touching into deeper truths because these truths are inside of themselves. And that's why they discover it. You don't need to tell them. You give them the plant, and then they realize this by themselves. So where are they getting that from? Well, they are getting it from where it was already there. It was just covered by all the layer of trauma and pain and things that slowly get us further and further away from ourselves, from the deeper part of ourselves, from the part of ourselves that know the truths. So to me, that's such a beautiful moment when I see somebody that is so disconnected start reconnecting and coming up with these things by themselves without anybody telling them.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. And that can't be overstated because so many times people people will be resistant towards, being told something directly. If somebody, that's just a thing that
Mm.
I've learned throughout psychology and sales and stuff. It's like I used to do sales as a job, and people that are really good at selling, they're not convincing somebody to buy directly. What they're doing is they're showing somebody all these different things so that that person can come to that conclusion on their own, right? That I want to buy this thing, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's yeah, that it goes for ideas. And I think that one thing that we underestimate as people, and this is another thing that plant medicine could help reveal to us, is the level of kind of brainwashing and hypnosis that we are in. All of us, just by purely being alive on this planet, have been conditioned by everyone around us, including the media, including everything that we've learned. I almost think has been from the very beginning cutting us off from these truths that you're saying that we're allowing to remember almost, and that we're allowing to come back in. If our society was constructed differently, um, maybe we wouldn't. I think these could still be helpful, but like we wouldn't be so cut off, and we're just so cut off from where our natural, organic way of being. I've been doing breakdowns from this book, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, but he talks about in that book how every animal, every being on the planet has this internal success mechanism. That's why you see, and you could also liken that to being connected to the field or whatever. That's why you see birds, they know exactly which way to fly to migrate during the winter. They know how to build their nests. All the animals, they have these things, and we as human beings have been cut off from those that are our nature, or those aspects of ourselves. So yeah, it's really like I said, I just wanted to make that point that we think a lot of the times that our own ideas are our own, or that we are, I honestly think the way that the human mind and the body works is like an electromagnetic field. We're picking up on other ideas in the collective consciousness, and sometimes our thoughts they're not, that's what Eckhart Tolle talks about in The Power of Now, that we don't need to identify so much with a thought. And all these spiritual teachings, meditation, a lot of it is allowing the thoughts to float by without identifying so much with each thought. And so, yeah, helpful for all of these different things. Um, I wanted to. So if people were interested, there's obviously opportunities that people can do this. Have you heard of a retreat called Rhythmia?
Mm-hmm. I have been there twice. I'm friends with the owner.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I just saw an
Yeah.
ad for that retreat pop up on my feed the other day, and it looked really cool. I didn't realize at first that it was a ayahuasca place,
Mhm.
a retreat, but I thought that was interesting too, that that was actually being advertised on YouTube. So it just goes to show that there is more. I don't know whether YouTuber was the as YouTube as a platform was aware or not that that was an ayahuasca retreat, but it seems to be that
Yeah.
there is much more, acceptance of these things
Acceptance.
on a whole level. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there is a lot more. This is also what I was telling you a little bit earlier off camera, that because there is more acceptance of all of these modalities, that's when I decided also to come out, because for 10 years I've been simply um, just under the radar. I didn't want anybody to know what I was doing. And today I see that there's a lot more acceptance of these
Yeah.
modalities. Yeah.
And there was a
And
lot
actually,
actually.
to
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there was a lot of like famous, well-known people that were speaking in the ad, like Michael Beckwith, who's has that,
Hmm.
in Agape in LA, because you're in LA.
Agape. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I used to live in LA for years up until 2020 during the pandemic, and things got kind of crazy there. So then that's when I ended up kind of moving out. But I love LA. LA has so much to offer in terms of. I actually never went to Agape, but I had always wanted to go there. I don't know if you've been or met Michael Beckwith
I've
ever.
been, I've been, and I have met him. Yeah, it's fun. It's like a place where people are really celebrating life with no religion, but it's still a church, and it does feel like a church. So a lot of the same elements that you would find in a church with the singing and the, like, looking at your neighbor. I mean, it's funny that I'm saying that because I've never been to church, so I'm not the best person to compare it, but I have obviously seen how it's done. And when I was there, I was like, oh wow, I am actually in church, but there's no there's no deity in particular that they praise. They praise life. They praise the creation. I you know To me, the creation and the creator, there's not that much difference between them.
Hmm.
Right? So
Hmm.
it's pretty beautiful. Beckwith is amazing too. And Rhythmia, in a way, I'm grateful that they are here because they have. It's pretty expensive to go to Rhythmia, and both to stay there and to go and fly there. This is not. It's not for people who don't have some means. But at the same time, I'm happy that exists because it's a luxury ayahuasca place, and so what that has done is people, CEOs, uh, businessmen, people who would never think of doing a plant medicine retreat, it's advertised for them. And so a lot of the people who would not have done it any other way, they are like, well, I wouldn't go to a jungle and sleep with the snakes, but I would go to a nice place with a beach in Costa Rica that's luxurious and has a pool and all of these things, and then also do plant medicine with people that are just like me. And so in that way, I think Rhythmia is great. It's still not the thing that I personally would recommend for people if they can find a local facilitator, because the ceremonies are very big, and so there isn't too much of a personalized experience. So if you are there's definitely there's so many different ways of serving plant medicine, and I am not saying one is better than the other. I have a preference for one that has personalized attention, because, for example, let's say that your specific trauma is that when you were a kid, your parents weren't paying attention to you. Your dad was, let's say, too busy with work, and your mom, I don't know, maybe whatever that is. Like you were maybe always like, mom, 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 dad, like, and then you were never paid attention to, and that created a specific trauma. But then you do ayahuasca, and then it comes up so that it can be resolved. And a lot of times, for certain traumas to be resolved, what that moment requires is for you to give to that person what that person did not receive. So, for example, personal attention, or for example, to be held when they are crying, or something like that. So, Rhythmia is, and I'm not here to um, basically discredit them.
Yeah.
I think there is a really good place for them, but it's not as personalized. So, if you have the chance of being with somebody who will be there for you, and that are also, here's where some of the science and spirituality starts blending. The world of ayahuasca and plant medicine is mostly skewed to the spiritual side. And what that means is that so many facilitators don't know much about psychology, don't know much about chemistry, don't know much about science, which is kind of weird to me, because it's almost like an architect that knows perfectly how to draw buildings, but they don't know anything about the resistance of materials. And it's like, well, you're an architect. Maybe you prefer to draw. Fine. You can dedicate your life to it, but you must know these other areas of your specialty, right? Even if they are
Right.
not the thing that you want to dedicate yourself to. And for me to not know psychology uh, when traumas are going to show up, or to not know neurochemistry, at least a little bit, the basics. You don't have to be have a degree in neurochemistry, but when you are actually giving alkaloids and chemicals, and there's a combination with potential pharmaceuticals or with heart conditions or things like that. So all of that is missing, or mostly in most facilitators. And so for the most part, if you go to a ceremony, to a random ceremony, there's a bigger chances that they're going to talk to you about spirits, about demons, about angels, about energy, and all of that is fine. But it's not the only aspect of it, especially for Westerners who have grown in a city, who have grown surrounded by skeptic people, by scientists, by atheists, by things that disconnect us from ourselves, like ads about how many things you should buy in order to be happy. Like all of these things start disconnecting us. And most importantly, the traumas that we go through in our formative years when we are children are going to show up during medicine, because the medicine is intending to heal them. And in order to heal them, we need to bring them up so that they can be addressed. So you need to understand how does the wounding process work? How does the healing process work? What are the things that seem like healing but are actually spiritual bypassing? All of these things are so essential to know in order to give a proper ceremony. So if anybody watching this wants to do a ceremony, try to find somebody local, but make sure that it is recommended by somebody that has told you that they are in integrity, that they have good intentions, and that they are knowledgeable. And actually, I did put out a video that is like I think I called it the 9 things to consider before going to an ayahuasca ceremony, and with the intention of reducing harm, because there's people maybe all over the world watching this. Maybe you have somebody in Russia, maybe you have somebody in, somewhere in Africa or in Europe, or maybe within the US, but in different areas. So to me, to reduce harm as much as possible is essential, so that we can use these tools to really, really do as much healing as we can. And we will all be having a much more joyful ride.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's one thing. I mean, as far as my understanding of it, that's one thing that has been kind of tougher for people, at least in the US, to access it, is because it seems like everyone's going on these retreats to, South America somewhere, or because people don't have, especially when you're not in a bigger city, in LA, I'm sure there's many more opportunities to do this,
Plenty.
but all across the US, a lot of people don't have access to it, or they wouldn't know where to go or where to begin. But I think that hopefully, if your curiosity sparks and it's something that you feel drawn to through this conversation or through anything, you'll be able to maybe find, go on like a journey, maybe even through Reddit. I have no idea. I haven't done any personal research myself, other than when I was living in California, and then it was like, I'd go to like Lightning in a Bottle or whatever. I'd meet people at these various different places. And it was like, okay, if I wanted to do this, I could definitely figure it out. But me currently not being there,
For sure.
would be harder to access. But yeah, I think that
I'm pretty sure that you know many more people that can redirect you to a ceremony than you might think.
Yeah.
Because it has become fairly popular. It was much harder before, but today, if you ask your friends, somebody will. I don't think there's going to be more than 1, or at the very most 2 degrees of separation. Somebody will tell you, yes, I know a shaman, or somebody will tell you, yeah, my friend has gone to this shaman. So yeah, I think it's better than trying to get somebody off the internet, for sure. You need that personal recommendation for the things that I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, so I would be, now that we've kind of talked about plant medicine, I would be really interested in hearing your thoughts on this conversation of the demons, getting into this, because like we mentioned before, it's a lot of people hear that word and there's this instant disconnect for a lot of people. And I think that's why it's very important, like you said just now, to know about psychology, to know about science, because that way you're able to bridge the gap for people. Because for me personally, I went through something in my very, like, recently this year in a relationship, and I coming out of that, the relationship, the way that things ended was so like awful and terrible and so surprising to me that I went down a rabbit hole looking really into cluster B personality disorders, um, and what all from that psychological framework, trying to explain, trying to understand what exactly happened, because the girl I was in a relationship with, it was like she was just a completely different person from who it was that, or she would go in and snap into these modes where it was like I didn't even know who this person was. And that's going through that kind of led me down into this idea, because I've been studying, there. I really do think Carl Jung talks about archetypes, and it's Neville Goddard talks about states and how you're simply occupying different states. And I think that these things exist in the collective consciousness, much like in your video when you described before. And I think that's something that we can all relate to on one level or another. We've all been uh, gotten into some mode where we feel that internal force, even though we know that doing this is something that isn't serving us or that we might regret later, we feel compelled to do it. And I feel like we've allowed these feelings to take hold, they take over. And that's kind of what, could be likened to a demon, or, something that is pulling you, compelling you to do something that you know deep down, like you're going to regret or isn't going to be. So very, very interesting to note. Even when, and so I do think that all of it goes hand in hand, because I've talked a lot about. I also talk about James Allen's book As a Man Thinketh. All of these books, they talk about the more that you dwell on certain ideas. Like a thief, for example, somebody that's going to go out and deliberately steal from somebody. It's not like they just randomly do that one day. It's like they've been thinking these thoughts. They've been allowing these thoughts to kind of dwell there in their consciousness. And I think that what you're allowing different kind of archetypal energies to dominate your consciousness, and then you see these people too that are possessed by this. They look like they're possessed, or like the people that do these terrible things, like these school shooters or any of these things that you see and you witness on TV. It's almost like the person like doesn't there's something weird going on. It's more than just like some psychological disorder. That's the conclusion that I've come to, is that there is something to this idea of, archetypal energies being possessed. So I'd really like to get your take on all of this right now, but I don't know if you're familiar with any of those disorders, like the cluster B or any of that.
Yes, I think before I know that you already watched the video, but if anybody in the audience hasn't, they might be thinking still that a demon is this little red
Right,
devil with a trident, right? And
right,
we're talking about that. Um, and I grew up an atheist. I am not an atheist anymore, but I grew up as an atheist, and I still have that kind of mentality still stayed with me. Still till today. I studied engineering, so I was more like in the science, math. I used to teach math, so um, yeah. For me, I'm so grateful that I grew up like that, because it has given me that skeptical mind, so that I can put myself into the minds of others when they are being skeptical about the things that we're talking about. And so hopefully that gives some weight or validity to when I talk about demons, because for me this word was also, as you said before, extremely triggering, and I would be like, okay, I just can't talk to you. If you are like going to talk about things that way, we are in a complete different universes. So the way I define a demon is just a force that makes people do things that go against their own well-being. And again, if you're skeptical about this word, remove the word for a minute and tap and think on in moments where you did things that you could just not help it, that that were against your own well-being, and many times you knew it. Many times you knew that what you were about to do was going against yourself. And maybe you even had an internal battle where you were going to, I shouldn't really do this. I might regret it. No, I will definitely regret it. Screw it. I'll do it anyway, right? So what is that force pulling you in that direction? You don't need to call it a demon. I call it a demon as for an array of different reasons. But if you're in the most skeptical side of things, at the very least, for ease of language, to say a force that pulls you doing things that go against your well-being is too long, right? We need to summarize it somehow. But that force, I think we can all agree that exists. Otherwise, if it wouldn't, people wouldn't do things that go against their own well-being because it simply makes no sense. The only way where you would do something like that is if there is a force pulling you to do that. Now, what is that force? Why is that force there? It is mostly related to needs that have gone unmet, trauma, and very deeply intense emotions. So these three things, what I would say is they create an emotional lack within ourselves. And that place, if you will, you can call it an emotional hole. Let's say that as a child, you really needed attention and you got none of it. So you grow up to really be craving that attention. And this is already programmed in you because it was programmed in formative years. And so you might, here's an example of how this person might do something that goes against their own well-being. This person might, let's say it's a guy whose mom didn't pay any attention to them. This kid might grow up in a way in which for a woman to pay attention to him is like oxygen. It's like nourishment, is food, is survival, right? Because he didn't get it. So then he might meet a girl and he falls in love with her only because this girl is all about paying attention to him. But everything else is a huge red flag. She's not the right person for him. And he might even know that and be like, oh, this girl, like, man, she's not for me, but oh my God, the way she pays attention to me. That's so refreshing. I really need that. Of course, people don't say these things or think it like that, but that is the thought process happening inside. So this is what's happening psychologically. Energetically, what's happening is that there is an energetic emotional hole that this girl can fit in perfectly, and that pulls the person into going into that direction. It's not the girl that's the demon, and it's not the guy that's the demon. It is that pull, that force, that because the situation matches perfectly in that way, then that force exists and makes people do things that could go against their own well-being. Anger is another very, very common. For example, we were mentioning school shootings, right? So what is happening with these people? Most likely, they have a level of anger, a level of not being seen, not feeling that they matter, not feeling all of these things, and they are all going unacknowledged. Nobody came and touched them in their shoulder and said, hey, I see that you're really, really angry. I see that you believe that nobody cares for you. I see that you're going through all of this and you're also alone in it and you have nobody to share it with. That somebody just saying that, somebody simply acknowledging that could make the person be like, like they would like so much would drop out of their system. But that doesn't happen, and it builds and it builds, and it creates bigger and bigger and bigger emotional holes. And so bigger demons, or another way of saying that is stronger forces to do things that go against their own well-being, which, as we started talking about at the beginning of our conversation, when you hurt others, you're also hurting yourself, right? So killing others is not going towards your own well-being either, or hurting others in any way. Then they start filling in these emotional holes. So these disorders that you were talking about are ways of putting it in psychological terms. But what is happening energetically or spiritually is that the bigger the level of pain and the less it goes acknowledged, the stronger it comes out energetically in these, like what I would call bigger demons, or which translates as these bigger psychological disorders. But we are in a way talking about the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The way that I see it too is like, I do feel like that type of energy, when it gets enough momentum, or it like feeds off of itself, it is like I've heard in various different spiritual teachings, and also Carl Jung talks about this, that these there's that drama triangle too. I don't know if you've seen that
Hmm.
Cartman drama triangle. Yeah, the victim,
Hmm. Yeah.
perpetrator, and savior. And so anytime that there's any one of those dynamics, it necessitates that there needs to be a persecutor, right? If you are dwelling in that victim consciousness. And so I think that what's happening is like you slip into that archetype, and then the archetype takes a hold, and it's no longer you in the driver's seat. It's like you're, like you said, you're compelled by this force that you feel is pulling you to do this thing or to act in this certain way. So I don't know. I just feel like this is a very important conversation that people need to kind of mentioning, like what we did at the beginning of the video too, talking about how I think by allowing ourselves to be pulled in these ways, and again, this could go for even something as simple as a habit of overeating, right? A habit of just eating too much junk food. Well, you've been brainwashed into thinking to a certain degree, oh, this is more palatable, this is more hyper stimulating, so I'm just going to keep doing this, even though you know, like you said, it's not for your own well being. Well, now that energy has just taken a hold. It's like you're unconsciously doing this every single night, like stuffing your face with cake or whatever it might be, right? That's just an example that's coming to mind. And of course, that's a much more innocent one when you talk about the extent to which these forces can kind of be at play in our lives. But I think it's very important that people need to realize that we are getting overtaken by this type of energy, and it's not really us anymore. It's not that I'm consciously making this decision to go out and hurt this person, or because I feel like the more that we are doing that, whether we're hurting ourselves or hurting others, that is an indication the more disconnected we are from the truth of reality. And so what's happening is we're being led astray by this energy that's taken a hold of us. And so sometimes I think people also get mixed up when they say, oh, like I was feeling this. Well, their feelings have taken hold, and it's not necessarily their own inner truth. It's more this foreign energy that's taken over them, whether you want to call it a demon, whether you want to call it a force or whatever. But it's not even really them. And so they're indulging in these
Yeah.
feelings, but then they act out in this way that's damaging to themselves and others, justifying it that, oh, well, you don't understand, this is how I was feeling. Well, those feelings aren't necessarily things that need to be always acted out and expressed upon. I think sometimes we need to process our feelings. It can be helpful to go see a therapist or see it in some way, and in a, much like you do and facilitate coaching with people. But somehow those feelings need to be processed in a way where you're not going to make it an irreversible decision that causes harm to yourself and other people, right?
Hmm. And when you say it's not them, if people manage to integrate that, meaning that they not only understand it and believe it, but that it becomes an integrated part of their belief system, where it's like, I really can see this is not me, that helps a lot. Because I mean, from one side, people might be like, "Oh, I am not taking responsibility." That's not the. We're not talking about the same thing. You still must eventually, when you're ready, take responsibility for the things that you have done with your body, right? But not. This is not you. What that helps do is de-shame the experience. So some people do things, then they later regret them, and then they feel shameful because they believe it was them. They believe that it was, oh, how could I don't know, cheat on my girlfriend? In the moment I just, and then if they would know that there is an actual reason, not that everything happens for a reason mentality, but that there was a reason, that like a cause that created that. For example, I have not paid enough attention by my mom, and I have a craving for the attention of women that it is much stronger than my own will. And that craving is an emotional hole. That's where the demon lives. That's where the force lives. That in the moment made you do that, even though you maybe tried to stop it. Some people are like, I really shouldn't be doing this, but then their minds fill up with these thoughts of like, but it would be so nice. It would be like, and they don't even understand. That's the surface. At the bottom of that thought, there is like, but I would really feel loved in ways that I needed much more than to be faithful, for example. To be faithful is not as important to me or to my wounded inner child as to receive love from a woman. And so that pulls them to do something, then they do it. And then once the experience is over, which another way of saying that is that the wounded inner child is temporarily satisfied. You have given the food that it needed for a moment. You have not healed it, which means it will ask for it later again. But once the child is satisfied, you come back. It is you who comes back and regrets things. And it's like, oh my God, what happened? It's almost like, what happened? Why did I do that? And then if you don't know that this is not you, that this is a force within you, that it is attached to your wounds, if you think that this is really you, then you become really shameful about it. It's like, I am a piece of crap. I am a bad person. I am all of these things. And what that does about shame is that then it makes you not want to look, because that is the effect of shame. When we are shameful about something, we want to kind of like put it aside and look somewhere else. Shame is an emotion that helps protect another emotion or another experience so that we don't look, because if we look in there, we're going to believe that we are not worthy of love. And so it is so important, in order to heal anything, to take as much shame as possible so that we can start looking in there. And the more we look, the more we will find the actual reasons of why we did those things that we are regretful of. And that is the first step to start healing it. And once you heal it, that force is not going to be there anymore. So if you heal your wound, in this example that I was giving around needing the attention of women, then the next time that you get the opportunity to be with somebody, even if you have a wife or whatever, you'll be like, actually, I'm not even tempted. That force is not there anymore. Why is that? It's because I've healed my need for female attention. And that's when people really realize, when they have gone through that whole journey, when they realize that it was never them. It was never them. It's never people, their true selves, that do those things that then they regret or that go against their well-being. It is the forces that are within their energetic bodies where there is a hole because of a wound. So if you're watching this and you're like regretful of anything, whatever that is, ashamed of anything that you have done, yes, take responsibility for it. But at the end of the day, it was not really you who did that. It was forces within you that are living inside your wounds. So if you want to really do something about it, rather than regretting or shaming yourself, which are useful emotions to know that something needs to change, if you really want to do something, go investigate what part of yourself needs to heal and get yourself straight to work. Because once you heal that, those forces are not going to have any pull in you anymore. And you will feel very free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And what you're saying is true, I think, for a good amount of people, where they feel that regret, they feel that afterwards, they're like, why did I do this? I think there's also a lot of people out there that almost it's the reverse. And I've talked about this before, but there's like this continuum where there's like two extremes, and this exists in everywhere in the universe, like the law of polarity, the principles in the Kabbalion. They talk about rhythm, swinging back and forth. There's hot, cold, light, dark. But the way that I think about this too is like that kind of that those feelings of inferiority kick in, right? If you did something right and then you feel the shame, you're like, oh, like, why did I do this? I'm a bad person, all this. The opposite of that spectrum also exists, where I've seen people, like in my relationship, they didn't express guilt. They doubled down and then made everybody else around them into the bad person, while they were the ones doing the things that they accused everybody else of doing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
either
I would
case,
say probably the effect is probably shame that makes people do that, because it's
yeah,
a way of separating yourself even further from the experience.
exactly. It's like a disassociation. So they're both kind of two sides of the same coin. But what we want is that more partial, that neutral observer to say, okay, this is what happened, and now why did this happen? how can I, look at this in an objective way where I can actually make a change here, because that's where we're going to be able to make a change. It's not when we're in these crazy emotional states of super amounts of shame or super amounts of like guilting the other person and blame. It's in the middle where we can say, hey, like I genuinely want to make a change here in the way that I'm showing up. And so I just wanted to make that point as well. But yeah, like you said, it's like they're both the same. It results from that other emotion, really.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why it's so important to de-shame.
Hmm.
If somebody, and if the person cannot do it by themselves, which a lot of people have not been taught how to do that, if we have it within ourselves to do it for our friend, so for example, to say, hey, it's okay that you did that. I mean, which a lot of people get confused. I'm not saying, hey, awesome, like good job, do it again. I'm saying it's another way of saying it was not you, right? So it's okay that you did that. Like, that doesn't make you less lovable. I still love you. You're still my friend. Can we please take a look at what happened here? And the person's like, no, like she did that, she did that. It's like all of those things could be true. That's her. Do you think there is anything there that you could take ownership for? I am here for you to receive you in it. It's okay that you've done those things. You can even say, I've done them too, or I've had my own version of it too. And I know how hard it is to own that. But I've done it and I feel okay with it. Wouldn't you want to feel okay with what you did? And the truth is, they are not feeling okay, whether they admit it or not. But if you can speak to that part, so basically if this is a person, you're going through the person and speaking to the part that it is being blocked directly, that part will resonate. And a lot of times manages to come through, and then the person finally breaks down and manages to own that. But the main thing that you did there was to not talk to the person, but to talk to their shame. If you can talk to their shame and tell their shame it's okay, it's beautiful what happens with people. It's just like they open up and then they manage to see that. So it is a great skill to learn for oneself, and that is really hard. You can start, with friends. If you have honest, it has to be honest. You cannot fake it. If you really think that the person is a bad person for doing what they've done, you can't tell them these things because you are not going to be speaking directly to their shame. But if you are
Hmm.
tapped into your own real compassion and you can see that the other person is trying their best and that they are possessed by these forces in the same way that we all are, it is not unique to this person, and that most likely what the other person is ashamed of, we have done too in one way or another, a different version of it, then it becomes easier to talk to them and to talk to ourselves. So if we can develop the skill of de-shaming others and ourselves, people are going to move so much closer to their healing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do want to just add one caveat to this, because I feel like people get, especially in the community, I make videos, and a lot of people that watch my videos come from this kind of manifesting law of assumption community. So there's a lot of these beliefs and things that get thrown around that's like, oh, if you just imagine and just believe that this person's going to start showing up like this, and then, because I think that what you're saying is totally valid, but if the other person isn't willing to go there, like let's say that you're doing that, you're trying to speak to them in this way, but or you're trying to see the best in the person, find that inner spirit that's truly there, that's not been overshadowed by all these layers of trauma and this kind of demon energy, but they just keep doubling down. It's like
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain point where it's like you can't really, it's not really up to you, and it's not really your responsibility to go in and heal somebody else's childhood traumas and wounds. And so if they're not willing to do that, it has to come from them too. There has to be a desire to do that and to
Mm-hmm.
move past it. And if there isn't, then it's probably not going to, because it's just going to be a black hole. um
Sure.
and so yeah. But I
Yeah,
agree.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
there's so much one can do, but at the end of the day, it's not even up to them because, as we say, as we've been talking throughout this conversation, sometimes they are so possessed, and this is not them. So what it is up to is their level of readiness. The thing is, if they are ready and you manage to do these things, then what your experience of the shaming and holding someone in compassion with their readiness is going to allow for them to open up. Now, if they are not ready, you can try your best, but don't try more than your best, because that would mean, as you were saying, you are being sucked into a black hole, and then you are going to be paying for it
Yeah.
because the other person's not ready for it. So you can always, it's almost like a conscious availability. You're available to give that to people, and you see if they receive it or not. And if they don't, it's probably because they are not ready. And sometimes what gets them ready is not that, but is to double down and get hurt even more, and then double down again, and then hurt
Hmm.
even more, until one day they just can't do any other thing than finally decide to look at themselves. And that is the thing that got them ready. So readiness here plays a huge part. Now, if they are ready and you don't hold a person in compassion, you might actually, in a way, be missing an opportunity. And also, holding a person in compassion is not something that you do for them. You also do it for yourself, because it helps you not take things personally. It's like, if it's not them, it's not that they have something against me, even if it looks like that, or if they even say, yeah, I have something against you, it might still not really be the case. You're like, this person is extremely wounded, and this is how it's showing up. And that helps oneself get into a better place. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because yeah, in this whole manifesting, the whole manifesting mindset, even though I don't necessarily think it's false, I also think is thrown around a lot and is misused a lot, and is used to do a lot of spiritual bypassing. And the effects of it end up being the opposite, where they don't manifest any of those things because they are using it to ultimately bypass the thing that's happening inside them that would bring upon the thing that they are trying to manifest by just saying it, right? So I'm
Yeah.
glad that you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I actually personally am guilty of making that mistake myself, where in that relationship that I'm mentioning, I would consistently, because I'm an advocate for these teachings, I would consistently imagine, want to see the good in my partner and want to imagine the relationship in the state where I wanted it to be, in this healthy, harmonious way. But if she wasn't willing to go there with me, I was almost entering into a space where I was deluding myself that it was going to come out on the other side and there's going to be this light at the end of the tunnel. Because if she keeps apologizing, but then her behavior doesn't change, that's not a true apology. That's manipulation. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is a caveat, and that's the thing with studying this stuff. That's why I always tell people that not to fall too much into any sort of dogmatic thinking that it has to be like this or this, because there's always shades of gray in all of these things, and every situation there's nuance. One person might tell you this certain approach that Neville Goddard uses of living in the end or whatever worked for him, but it might not work in the same way for the same exact thing that it did for him, and the way that it worked for him for the thing that he used it for. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
that's why also understanding psychology, like you said, is so powerful and so helpful, because then we can go in, understand our own inner psychology, understand also what's going on, what's at play with other people. Like there was a lot of emotional psychological manipulation that was used against me at the end of this relationship and throughout it, that going and understanding and actually being able to put a label to it is very helpful. For example, triangulation is something where somebody will get other people to buy into their narrative about what's going on, so that they feel like they have the social pressure to exert and make you, as let's say that you're the one on the receiving end of this, feel bad as if you've done something wrong when you hadn't actually done anything wrong. Let's say that you're trying to help somebody, but they've gone around and spread these rumors or gossip about you doing X when you were doing Y. Now they feel justified, and so there's just so many levels to it. And so I definitely would recommend people to be do their own readings on psychology. When if you're struggling in relationships, investing in your own education and knowledge about psychology, all of these things, manipulation tactics, whatever, will be helpful to you, because you'll be able to put a name to what's going on, much like the conversations with the demons too. Instead of having this amorphous, oh, I don't know what this is, it's like, okay, now we can put a label to it. Whether that resonates or a psychological thing, the psychological force resonates for you, you can at least be aware of what's going on and put it into words, rather than trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make any sense. So I think that I found that to be really helpful for me coming out of that. And then really, yeah, like you said too, I think that a lot of people just get caught up in, we all do this, right? We all get caught up in our own story. And so as much as we can to be aware that these dynamics are playing out, they will play out and they have played out from the beginning of time. For example, that victim and abuser, victim and savior. And so it's like, if you notice again with that learning, I'm getting sucked into this framework where now I'm showing up as the savior trying to fix everything because this person has fallen into the victim thing or vice versa. And so now, again, even with the savior thing, you're kind of being pulled and compelled to fix somebody else's issues, maybe that you shouldn't actually be trying to fix. Maybe it's something that they
Mm-hmm.
need to work on for themselves. Maybe you can help point them in the right direction. But by you stepping in, it's kind of like the helicopter parent phenomenon where it's like you're doing all your kids' homework but they never actually learn how to do anything for themselves. You see this happen a lot of the times now with people that are growing up. It's like they don't even know how to do their own laundry by the time they're in college and stuff because their parents have been doing everything for them. You're actually doing a disservice to that person by stepping in too
Mm-hmm.
much. So really interesting things to be aware of. But yeah.
And that's really cool what you're saying, which brings me to a really interesting topic, which is people think that trauma, so many times people come to my ceremonies and they're like, I came because my friend told me, but I don't really have any trauma. Because people think that trauma is like you've been sexually abused or you've been hit by a belt with a belt by your father as a child, like, or you've been to war. These are the things that a lot of people, better said, consider trauma. But your parents doing everything for you is a form of trauma. It's just less obvious. It's not what we consider trauma. But the reason why it's trauma is because they are not connected with the true needs of a child. So trauma happens, and I talk a lot about this in my channel, which is trauma simply happens. If people can integrate this, then they'll realize that everybody's super traumatized. Trauma happens when your needs have gone unmet. And we have so many needs. And we're talking especially about formative years, but trauma can happen as an adult too. But we have the need to be loved when we do things wrong, or to not be shamed. But we also have the need to be encouraged and empowered. So if your parents are doing everything for you, your need to be empowered goes unmet. And then so you grow up with the trauma associated with that and the behavior that will come as a consequence of having that trauma. So I realized this firsthand when I realized one of my biggest traumas is not being abused, being hit, or any of that. Is that my dad was extremely permissive, and my mom, because she saw how permissive my dad was. So my dad was kind of like what you were saying, doing everything for me. I want a laptop. I'm a child. I shouldn't, like, oh, here it is. Like, have everything. You don't need to work for anything. Just take it all, right? Which I know that for a lot of people are like, oh, that sounds like a great childhood. I had the opposite. Yeah, if you had the opposite trauma, then my thing will look really good for you because it's the opposite of what you got. But they are both sides, extremes on the same spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom would see that and would be like, you are spoiling him. So my mom became very strict, and she was the one saying no. And so anytime I wanted something, if my mom would say no, I would go to my dad, and my dad would say yes. And so what kind of trauma generated that is that I realized that no matter what, I can always get what I want. I can always go around the law. So my mom represented the law for me and discipline. It created a trauma that discipline is bad and lack of discipline is good, which now as an adult, it takes so much more effort to undo that. Discipline is great, and it just puts my life in so much more order. But for me, it doesn't come natural. I need to put so much effort for it. So, I mean, I'm not comparing my trauma with somebody that has gone to war, but I really want to get the point across that trauma can come always comes in a way where certain needs have gone unmet, and that we have many more needs than what we probably might think, and that the way in which that trauma plays out later on in life is much harder than to undo. You can still do it, you can still heal it, but yeah. So when people come and say, I don't have any trauma, I laugh. Of course,
Mhm.
I don't know all of this, but internally I crack up because I'm like, okay, fine, take this little cup of medicine. Then you tell me if you have trauma or not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there we go again. It's really, I'm glad you brought that up because it goes back to those two polarities again, right? One form of trauma being not enough freedom, and one being too much freedom. Because
Correct.
everything, you can think of anything in terms of that. And again, what we'd want is to be right there in the middle, where that's the path of true growth. That's the path, like you said, how important discipline can be in your life as an adult. It's valuable. I mean, not only valuable, it's necessary for you to live a life of fulfillment. And I think a lot of people, because we're in this hyper stimulating, I need it now type of mentality, like quick hits of dopamine. We get an Amazon package like the same day delivery, next day delivery, everything's instantaneous. We forget this a lot in our modern day society, that like getting everything that we want right in the moment, those that instant gratification isn't necessarily the path to fulfillment or to a life that we're actually going to, genuinely be proud of, genuinely feel that fulfillment in. And uh, honestly, I think that relationships too, people have taken it to be, oh yeah, I need to be feeling these quick dopamine hits all the time in my relationship for it to be like love. And I don't believe that. Like, love is a decision, and it's about showing up together, making sure that both of you are working towards something and building a relationship and a life together that's going to be sustainable for yourself and your children, if you choose to have children as well. Like, creating that be but that's not always going to be done by having these just dopamine hits of falling in love and feeling the butterfly honeymoon effect for 20 years. That doesn't exist. There's going to be problems, there's going to be challenges, and it's about having that goodwill with each other and making that decision on an ongoing basis that, look, I'm choosing to make this work together, rather than, you know, choosing an easy escape route. And not to say that like every relationship is going to last forever, but going in with that intention is part of how our ancestors have made our species survive, right? That teamwork
Yeah.
effort, it's like we've lost that in this modern day age, and it's like totally become destructive for us as humanity. I mean, you see it written that like every country, like the birth rates are just plummeting and stuff, right? It's very obvious and in our face now. But yeah, man, really, really cool topics that we dug into here. I hope that for all of you guys watching this, you guys got some benefit out of this. It's inspiring me to actually, I want to now, I've never done ayahuasca, like I said before, but I am very curious about it. And at the very least, experimenting with some other forms of medicine here um, seems like something that would be great to do, just as a nice kind of refresh. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on or anything before we kind of wrap it up, but
Not really. I'd like to just finish by saying that healing work, whatever that is for you, is the most important thing that we should all be doing, because especially before having children, because anything that you don't do is going to be passed on to your children. This is both genetically through something called epigenetics. Uh, 95% of the DNA is not known what it is for. And until recently, it has been called junk DNA, which
mhm.
sounds so insane because nature's so incredibly wise and everything is so perfectly put together that for 95% of your DNA to not have any purpose and call it junk DNA is honestly too arrogant from the scientific community. um, so it's better to say we just don't know what it is there for. But we know that with the 5% that we know, all of the things that we know happen. So imagine how much can happen with the rest, right? And I obviously can't confirm that it is in that 95% that your traumas are passing to your children. But what I do know is that um, humans adapt with every generation. So if I put your children in the Antarctic, in Antarctica, right, and then they have children, and then they have children, and eventually, a few generations down the road, maybe many generations, they are going to grow to have much more hair, much more robust. They are going to adapt to that environment. Now, that adaptation didn't happen in one go in one of those generations. It happened very little each generation. So the same happens with trauma. Each generation adapts to the trauma that it has been passed on to them. Now, is that in the 95% of the DNA that we don't know? Maybe it's in with a different way. And that's the scientific side. The psychological side is that in all of the places that we do not heal, then when our children do those things, those emotional holes we've been talking about throughout this whole conversation are going to get activated, and we are going to act upon our children in a way that does not attune to their needs. All the places that we don't heal are going to be wounding our children through our behavior, whether we know it or we are aware of it or not. So please do as much healing work as you can. Plants are great for that because they accelerate it, but it's not a replacement for it. Most of the important thing about plant medicine or any psychedelic is what you do after with it. You can compare it with university and going to work. You can study for as long as you want, but you will never really learn it until you start applying it when you go to work. And plant medicine and other healing modalities are usually the university aspect of it, and then you have to then apply it in your everyday life. So if you have the possibility of doing some mushrooms or doing ayahuasca or doing other plant medicines, there's wachuma, there's many others, go for it. If you don't, if you're too scared, if you don't feel this is for you, or maybe it is for you but not yet, whatever it is important that we start doing as much healing work as possible. This is going to bring ourselves a much more joyful life, but especially it's going to make our children have a much more joyful life too. So that's the message I want to leave with. There's nothing more important than healing work. I'm convinced of that, and that's why I even started my channel. So I hope that that people can take that home.
Yeah, that's a great message to end this with. And it reminds me, the way that I make sense of it in my mind too, is that the less that we do that, and the more trauma that we continue to pass on generation to generation, and the more kind of damage we continue to pass on, the more of like a hell on earth, so to speak, we're creating. And we can choose to create that more heaven on earth by, like you just mentioned and articulated very well. And I think it's important. It's very important. It seems to be that almost, all these different trends that happen. A lot of people are doing this now, where they're kind of allowing their kids to just do whatever, right? And like you mentioned, that's like a different form of trauma. It's like we need to focus back on how to instill the next generations and ourselves first, but also our children with kind of just more truth. And I guess that's like ultimately kind of wraps up this whole conversation, and the purpose of plant medicine, the purpose of doing this healing work, is to embody that way of being where we do no harm, and we continue to bring about, in the best way that we possibly can, the energy and the light that we want to be as a positive influence. But yeah, thank you so much, Yvonne. I'm going to
thank you, Alex, so much.
Yeah, for everybody watching this, I'm going to leave a link to Yvonne's channel, and you guys can also check out his work. He's got some really great videos, as well as reach out to him if you feel compelled to do so. With that being said, guys, much love as always. Drop this video with a like, hit me with a subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.